The mom of a teenager found dead in the middle of the road in 2015 named Buster Murdaugh as a prime suspect in his murder years ago, and Stephen Smith's mom, Sandy Smith, sent a letter to the FBI asking the federal agency to investigate her 19-year-old son's mysterious death in Hampton County, South Carolina. In the letter, she wrote that an alleged witness told a family member that Buster had murdered her son by beating him to death with a baseball bat, and the unidentified witness who claimed they were present during the murder but was then allegedly coerced into silence by Buster, who threatened to kill him if they spoke up about what had happened. The bombshell letter also claimed that Randy Murdaugh, Buster's uncle and the brother of Alex Murdaugh, contacted Smith's parents hours after his body was discovered, offering to represent them. Miss Smith wrote that she and Stephen's father were initially told that her son was shot. Then they were told that he was killed in a hit and run, and then he was beaten to death, but investigators told them to continue to say it was a hit and run because they didn't want to alert the killer. And on the day her son was killed, the first call came from law enforcement notifying her of her son's death, and the second came from Randy Murdaugh. Not long after, the same morning, and in fact, he called her ex-husband's cell phone as they waited in the police station for a positive identification and said he heard of the case and was interested in working for little to no cost as a liaison between the family and investigators. The Smiths accepted the offer but remained unsure why Mr. Murdaugh wanted to help them, and they also weren't sure how he found out so quickly, even before it was confirmed to be their son. But after just a few interactions, Miss Smith said Randy stopped returning their calls, and it was around that time, just days after Smith's death, that Stephen's twin sister, Stephanie Joyner, was approached multiple times by her peers telling her that Randy Murdaugh's nephews were responsible. Stephen also told his twin sister that he had a fling with a boy and that they had a deep-sea fishing trip planned for July. But Stephen died on the 8th of July, so the fishing trip didn't happen. This and Randy's sudden departure from representing them raised the family's suspicion, and to me could have just been the Murdaugh's way of figuring out what information Stephen had informed his family and friends with, and so, not long after that, Stephen's brother Chris was approached by an individual claiming to be a first-hand witness to his murder who said they were out smashing mailbox when they came upon Stephen, and Buster seized the opportunity. This young man was the same young man who allegedly said that Buster threatened to kill him if he ever spoke up, so the information was given to the investigators, but nothing has come of it. Miss Smith also told the FBI that she had been tipped off about a conversation between a schoolmate of Paul's and school officials in which the classmate had claimed that Paul had knowledge of the murder and implicated Buster as the murderer. Instead of this information being passed on to law enforcement, it remained within the school, and then Paul changed schools not long afterwards. Prior to Stephen's death, he told friends he was involved romantically with someone from a prominent family in the county who was hiding his sexuality, and if you read between the lines, the Murdaughs are probably the most prominent family in Hampton County. Miss Smith also claimed that Buster got rid of his vehicle in the aftermath of the murder, and she believes that her son's DNA could have been in the vehicle based on the lack of blood on the scene and the location of Stephen's own car, and that her son was transported to the site where his body was found. She also described how investigators had reportedly stonewalled the family about data they could have retrieved from her son's phone, and claimed that the conclusions by the coroner that Stephen died by a hit and run contradicted the evidence and beliefs of some of the initial investigators on the case. In the 4-page letter, she outlined several other alleged revelations detailing how the investigation appeared to have been derailed by local investigators and the prominent Murdaugh family to cover up her son's murder. Investigators have never announced any connection between the Murdaugh family and Smith's death, but it's interesting how investigators reopened the case into his death in 2021 following their probe into the deaths of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh. SLED officials said they were waiting until Alec Murdaugh's double murder trial was over to make the announcement because of the concern over witness testimony. Stephen was an openly gay 19-year-old nursing student who was found laying dead in a road in Hampton County, South Carolina in the early morning of July 8, 2015, just miles from the Murdaugh's Moselle estate, where disgraced convicted murderer Alex Murdaugh murdered his wife Maggie and son Paul 6 years later. Stephen was apparently walking to his home on Joe Milley Road after running out of gas on Highway 601 and had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, and later his car was found a few miles down the road. His death certificate states that he died due to severe blunt force trauma to his head that investigators claimed resulted after being struck by a vehicle during a hit and run, which was a ruling his mother and investigators on the original case have long disputed. There were no skid marks around his body, no vehicular debris, and Smith's loosely tied shoes were still on his feet, all evidence which Smith's family believes cast doubt on him being struck and killed by a vehicle. Police reports also revealed that some of Smith's injuries were inconsistent with being struck by a car, and the case file reveals a working theory among first responders at the scene that Smith's death was a homicide and not the result of being struck by a car. One state trooper wrote in his notes that when he arrived on the scene, the county coroner immediately advised him it was a homicide and pointed to a wound on Smith's head that the coroner believed to be a gunshot wound. And a separate report by a sled agent noted an EMS worker believed they found a projectile wound on the victim's head. And another incident report by a deputy also wrote that upon checking the body, it appeared the victim had been shot. Notably, the report indicates sled agents disagreed the head injury was a bullet wound, and no bullet casings were ever found. A sled lab later found several metallic blue paint chips on Smith's clothes, but couldn't determine what type of vehicle they might have come from. A sled agent also told an investigator the paint could be from an industrial tool, a dumpster, or signpost, but in my opinion, I believe it's probably from a metal baseball bat. Stephen's death was initially misclassified as a vehicular hit and run by Erin Presnell, a forensic pathologist at MUSC, and she reached this conclusion even though Smith's injuries, which included a 7+ inch laceration on the right side of his forehead, were inconsistent with a vehicular strike, and there was also zero evidence of that on the roadway where Smith's body was found, which Highway Patrol wrote in their report describing the crime scene. They saw no evidence to suggest the victim was struck by a vehicle, and another investigator who walked the scene found no evidence of car parts or pieces at the scene, and the location of Stephen's body in the middle of the roadway was inconsistent with being struck by a vehicle. His head wound produced so much blood it was initially confused for a gunshot blast, and troopers and investigators weren't the only ones to express doubts regarding the official narrative of being struck by a vehicle. And following Stephen's autopsy, Hampton County Coroner Ernie Washington did not agree with the pathologist, stating that the victim was struck by a motor vehicle. But still, she stuck to her story, but she offered nothing to support her claim other than the fact Stephen's body was found in the road. So given the questions surrounding his death, they called for an independent forensic review of Presnell's autopsy findings, including the exhumation of his body from its resting place in Gooding Cemetery in Crocketville, South Carolina, which Sandy Smith, his mom, also supported. The determination that Stephen died of a hit and run appears to be one investigator's question at the time, and at least two challenged the pathologist who performed the autopsy about her determination, and their notes indicate the county coroner disagreed with the finding, and then Presnell was contacted on the evening of July 8th to try and understand what brought her to that decision, and she told him the wound was not a gunshot wound, nor was a bullet or fragments found during the x-ray, and since the body was in the roadway, she could only theorize that it had to be a motor vehicle that caused his death. When he asked her about what caused Smith's head injury, she told him it was not her job to figure that out. It was his. Seems like he was talking to a wall and she had already made her mind up. Another investigator met with her to seek clarification later in July 2015, but when the investigator asked why the pathologist said Stephen was hit by a car, she said because he was found in the middle of the road and that she had no other evidence other than that. On December 15, 2015, 5 months after Smith's murder, investigators received a tip from Darrell Williams, who said his stepson Patrick Wilson told him Sean Connolly, another Hampton County teenager, was driving a vehicle which struck and killed Stephen Smith on the night in question. Wilson and Connolly both lived in the area near where Stephen Smith's body was found, and at the time of Wilson's confession, he was facing attempted murder charges, which were later dropped by solicitor Duffy Stone, whose office employed Alec Murdaugh as a badge-carrying attorney and also followed Murdaugh's father, grandfather, and great-grandfather in office. And additionally, on August 7, 2015, 1 month after Smith's death, Randy Murdaugh filed a motor vehicle accident lawsuit against Connolly on behalf of his client, Christopher Steele. And less than a year later, on May 17th, another Murdaugh attorney filed another motor vehicle accident lawsuit against Connolly, but both actions were later dismissed by Murdaugh-friendly judges. During the initial investigation, the Murdaugh name cropped up numerous times in official documents in the case, and there has been long murmurings in the community that a Murdaugh boy may have been involved. Buster and Stephen were classmates, and there were unconfirmed rumors that the two had been in some sort of relationship around the time of his death. And for 6 years after Smith's death, the case was closed, and there were no developments in the case. But days after the June 7, 2021 murders of Maggie and Paul, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, or SLED, announced that it was reopening an investigation into Stephen Smith's death. The agency said in January that progress had been made in the case, but hasn't provided any new details, and now after Murdaugh was convicted on March 2nd for killing his wife and son, attention has been turned back to Stephen's case. But Miss Smith's attorney Eric Bland insisted that the new investigation is not about any member of the prominent legal dynasty and that this is about Stephen Smith. Now Miss Smith's letter in 2016 to the FBI has come to light, revealing what she believed may have happened to her son in the months after he was killed. In the letter, she wrote that the investigation into her son's death was being deliberately derailed and that she no longer trusted law enforcement working on the case, and it has been obvious from the very first week of the investigation that authorities are covering up critical evidence and she no longer knows who to trust. But before contacting the FBI, she said that she had contacted then South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, who responded and assigned new investigators to the case, but that probe also stalled, and for the last 8 years, Stephen's mother has been fighting for answers about his death and now hoping that an independent investigation will provide answers. She also never accepted the theory her son was killed in a hit and run, and it's clear Stephen Smith's family was skeptical from the beginning. In an interview described in the case file, his family said he would have never been walking in the middle of the roadway where his body was found, and Stephen would have walked through the woods or nearby cornfield to get home, and he also would have called a family member like his twin sister if he needed help. The family's attorney also believes the lack of debris at the scene is suspicious, because we all know if you strike an animal on a highway, vehicle debris is everywhere, and the fact that Stephen's body is apparently placed in the middle of the roadway and there's no debris of any kind present really leads them to believe that this is not what caused his death. Eric Bland pointed to Smith's loosely tied shoes, that if you're hit by a vehicle that's going fast enough, it's going to project you and your shoes are just going to fall off under the best of circumstances. And with Stephen's shoes, they were loosened and untied, so it's almost inconceivable that his shoes didn't come off if he was hit by a car. Miss Smith said she could guarantee that Stephen was not in that road and he was taken from his car, and that everybody knew what he drove, because he had the ugliest little yellow car in town. The boys were coming from a baseball game and she thinks that they were right behind him, so when he pulled over, they were right there. But she will never believe her son would have been walking in the middle of the road like that. And she reiterated several times her opinion that her son was killed for being gay by several local Hampton County youths from prestigious families which she believes have sworn to protect their children no matter what horrible crime they may have committed. His head was crushed with a hole in it, but no other marks on his body. Buster Murdaugh finally issued his first statement on the matter, forcefully denying any involvement in Smith's death. But all I know is there is still a murderer or murderers walking around that community freely. And hopefully the truth will finally come out to what happened to Stephen Smith that night. Who do you think killed Stephen Smith? Thanks for watching.